What if everything the modern wellness industry is selling you right now, the supplements, the powders, the overpriced cleansers, the cold-pressed bottles with perfect labels and inflated promises, was already sitting in a book written thousands of years ago? Here is something almost nobody talks about. The foods described in biblical scripture are not just religious symbols, they are nutritional weapons. And researchers keep running the studies, building the trials, measuring the markers, and arriving at the same astonishing conclusion: ancient people knew exactly what they were doing. Today we are going to walk through 10 foods that appear directly in biblical text and show you why each one is far more powerful than most people realize. Stay with me through this whole list because number 4 was so medically useful that ancient physicians built entire healing traditions around it. And number 9 was so central to biblical life-healing kingship worship and survival that once you see the full picture, you will understand why Scripture could not stop mentioning it. All right, let's get into it. Here are 10 biblical superfoods that will heal you, instantly ranked from underestimated to absolutely essential. Number 10. Dates, the original energy bar that kept desert civilization moving. Let's begin with one of the most underestimated foods in the ancient world, dates. The date palm shows up repeatedly across biblical and ancient Middle Eastern life, not because it was beautiful, but because it was survival. Think about who needed a food like this: travelers crossing desert terrain, merchants walking for days, pilgrims heading toward feast days, workers needing fuel that would not spoil. They carried dates, and for good reason. Dates are calorie-dense, shelf-stable, mineral-rich, and fast to digest without behaving like refined sugar. They provide a quick source of energy, but their fiber slows absorption enough to soften the crash you would get from processed sweeteners. That alone would make them valuable. But modern research has found something even more interesting. Regular date consumption in late pregnancy has been associated in controlled trials with shorter labor times and better cervical readiness at admission. Ancient midwives used them for exactly that reason, long before obstetrics had a vocabulary for it. They also deliver potassium, magnesium, copper, manganese, B vitamins, and polyphenols in one compact food that can sit in your palm. This is not a trendy snack. It is a biblical survival food with a medical reputation that kept growing because it kept proving itself. Number 9. Pistachios, the nut Jacob thought was worthy of a ruler. There is a detail in Genesis most people fly right past. When Jacob sends his sons into Egypt during famine carrying gifts to negotiate with the ruler who controls the grain supply, pistachios make the list. Think about that. In a moment of scarcity, fear, and survival, he chooses pistachios as a worthy offering. That tells you exactly how prized they were. Not as a casual snack, as prestige nutrition. And modern science says that ancient valuation makes perfect sense. Pistachios are unusually rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 carotenoids strongly associated with eye protection, especially the macula. They also provide meaningful potassium, a surprisingly strong amino acid profile for a plant food, and one of the most interesting microbiome effects seen in nut research. Clinical work has shown pistachios can significantly increase beneficial gut bacteria, including bifidobacteria, while also delivering satiety and a lower net calorie burden than people assume because part of their fat is not fully absorbed. Before anyone had a term like gut microbiome, biblical households were already treating this food like something valuable. Jacob understood what modern nutrition is finally relearning. Some foods are too useful to waste on casual thinking. Number 8. Onions. The prebiotic king that helped build civilization. Onions appear alongside garlic in one of the most emotionally revealing food passages in Scripture. When the Israelites break down in the wilderness, onions are among the foods they grieve. And historically that makes complete sense. Egyptian workers helping build massive state projects were paid in onions and garlic. Not gifted them, paid in them. That means onions were not garnish. They were infrastructure. Modern science makes that even more impressive. Onions are one of the best food sources of quercetin, a polyphenol studied for anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antihistamine effects. They also provide prebiotic fibers, especially inulin-type compounds, that feed key beneficial bacteria in the gut. In other words, they support the internal ecosystem. Modern people are now spending fortunes trying to rebuild with powders and capsules. The ancient world just ate onions. Raw onions deliver more quercetin. Cooked onions still provide their prebiotic benefits. Either way, they are one of the foundational foods that supported strength digestion and resilience in ordinary people. The people mourning onions in the desert were not being dramatic. They were remembering what it felt like to function well. Number 7. Barley, the grain of the common person that outperforms modern favorites. Barley is not glamorous. It never was. In the biblical world, barley belonged to soldiers, laborers, common households, and ordinary bread. When Jesus feeds the multitudes in John, the loaves are barley loaves. That is important, because the grain of ordinary people turns out to be one of the most metabolically impressive grains ever studied. Barley is exceptionally rich in beta-glucan, a fiber with effects strong enough that regulatory agencies formally allow health claims around it. It helps flatten blood sugar spikes, reduce LDL cholesterol, support immune activity, and feed beneficial gut bacteria all at once. And in head-to-head comparisons, barley often outperforms oats in post-meal blood sugar response. For a food that is inexpensive, ancient, durable, and widely available, that is astonishing. People think of barley as plain because it became associated with simplicity, but sometimes what looks ordinary turns out to be elite nutrition hiding in plain sight. Barley did not earn its place in the biblical world because it was second best. It earned it because it kept people going. Number 6. Figs, the prescription that saved a king. Now we move to one of the most striking medical moments in all of Scripture. When King Hezekiah is gravely ill, Isaiah does not only pray, he gives a treatment instruction. Apply figs. That alone should make you stop. Because this is not vague symbolism. It is an actual medical intervention recorded in biblical text. And when researchers started looking seriously at figs, the logic became hard to ignore. Figs contain proteolytic enzymes that help break down damaged tissue, along with compounds associated with antimicrobial action and support for early wound healing. The latex of fresh figs has been studied for exactly these kinds of properties. Then there is the food value itself. Figs are rich in soluble fiber minerals and steady energy. They nourish the gut, support digestion, and provide the kind of dense nutritional value ancient people would have recognized immediately. Fresh when available, dried when needed. Useful both as food and in the right context as treatment. Isaiah did not prescribe something random. He prescribed something people already knew had power. Number 5. Pomegranate, the antioxidant that decorated Solomon's temple. When you see pomegranates carved into temple architecture, that is not just decoration. In the biblical world, pomegranates represented abundance, beauty, fertility, life, and richness. But that symbolic role may have been reinforced by something even deeper. This fruit is biochemically extraordinary. Pomegranates contain unique compounds that the body converts into metabolites now being studied for anti-inflammatory effects, mitochondrial protection, and potential roles in healthy aging. Clinical trials have shown improvements in blood pressure, arterial flexibility, oxidative stress, and inflammatory markers. The antioxidant concentration is so strong that pomegranate routinely ends up compared with red wine, green tea, and blueberries, and holds its ground. Even the rind, which most modern people throw away, has a history of traditional use for intestinal infections and gut inflammation, and modern interest in its tannin content is growing. The whole fruit is useful. The edible part nourishes. The medicinal tradition goes further. And the symbolism suddenly makes a lot more sense. Ancient people did not honor pomegranate by accident. They were paying attention. Number 4. Garlic, the food people grieved like they had lost medicine. This is where the list starts getting intense. When the Israelites cry out in the wilderness, garlic is one of the foods they specifically mourn. And once you understand what garlic actually does, that emotional reaction becomes perfectly reasonable. When garlic is crushed, it produces allicin, one of the most broad-spectrum natural antimicrobial compounds ever identified in food. It has shown activity against bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites, and regular garlic consumption has been linked in controlled studies to fewer colds, shorter respiratory illnesses, lower blood pressure, better lipid profiles, and reduced platelet aggregation. Egyptian medical papyri list garlic again and again in medical preparations. That is not folklore. That is accumulated observation. The critical detail is that raw garlic is the most potent medicinal form. Crushing it activates the chemistry. Heat reduces it. So when the ancient world used garlic both as food and as medicine, they were not confused about categories. They understood one of the great truths of traditional nutrition. Sometimes the strongest medicines are the foods you eat all the time. Garlic is not just biblical. It is one of the clearest examples in history of food behaving like medicine. Number 3. Almonds, the food. So important it was built into sacred symbolism. When the menorah is described with cups shaped like almond blossoms, and when Aaron's rod buds and produces almonds, Scripture is not choosing that image casually. The almond tree was associated with watchfulness because it blooms early before many other trees even wake up. But the symbolism only becomes more powerful when you realize how valuable almonds were as food. Gram-for-gram almonds are one of the most nutrient-dense foods in the ancient world and the modern one. They are especially rich in vitamin E, magnesium, healthy fats, and compounds associated with metabolic stability, better blood sugar response, lower LDL cholesterol, and improved satiety. Clinical trials on almonds repeatedly show they help the body handle food better, especially in a world overloaded with refined carbohydrates. And just like pistachios, part of their internal structure means not every calorie behaves the way the label would suggest. Some of what they contain supports the microbiome, instead of being fully absorbed. Ancient people did not need a lab to know almonds mattered. They ate them. They watched what happened. And then they placed them in sacred imagery. That is not an accident. That is a civilization signaling importance. Number 2. Raw honey, the antimicrobial heaven stored in a hive. The Bible mentions honey so often that modern people almost stop hearing it. But raw honey is not just sweetness. It is one of the most remarkable medicinal foods ever studied. Clinical research has shown that raw honey can act against dangerous bacteria, including resistant strains, through multiple mechanisms at once. It generates hydrogen peroxide, when activated maintains a hostile environment for microbes through low water activity and acidity, and contains compounds that actively damage bacterial structures. This is why medical-grade honey is now used in wound care settings. Not as a novelty, as protocol, but the key word is raw. Heat changes honey. Processing changes honey. Filtering and shelf-stabilizing, it may make it prettier and easier to pour, but it strips away much of what made it medicinal in the first place. The honey of Scripture was not the flat commercial syrup most people buy now. It was raw, active, enzymatic, and alive. Applied to wounds, it protects and helps them heal. Taken at the first sign of throat irritation, it does more than soothe. Taken in warm water, it supports rather than burdens the system. And archaeologists have found ancient honey still preserved after thousands of years. That tells you something profound. The people who treasured honey were not merely enjoying a treat. They were handling one of the most stable and medically intelligent foods on earth. Number 1. Olive oil, the ancient world's most complete medicine. There was only ever one food that could sit at number 1. Olive oil, referenced over and over in Scripture. used in kingship worship, healing daily nourishment, light, and care for the wounded. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, oil is applied to wounds because people knew exactly what it was for. This was not symbolic decoration. It was medicine. Modern nutritional science has studied extra virgin olive oil more intensely than almost any traditional food on Earth, and the results keep pointing in the same direction. Cardiovascular protection, reduced inflammation, metabolic support, lower chronic disease risk, and better long-term outcomes across multiple systems. The polyphenols matter, the fatty acid profile matters, the anti-inflammatory chemistry matters. But what matters most is that olive oil was never a side ingredient in biblical life. It was a central technology of survival and healing. And here is the uncomfortable modern truth: most of what is sold as olive oil today is not the same thing. Late harvest oils, diluted oils, heat-damaged oils, poorly sourced oils, all of that strips away the very compounds that made olive oil medicinal in the first place. What the biblical world used was alive with antioxidants and integrity. And when you find the real thing, now early harvest extra virgin properly handled modern science keeps confirming the same thing ancient people already knew. Olive oil is not just food. It is one of the most complete, daily healing substances ever discovered. 10 foods, thousands of years of observation, and every road leads to the same conclusion: the ancient world was not primitive. It was paying attention. That may be the most important idea in this entire video: the antimicrobial force of raw honey, the anti-inflammatory power of olive oil, the gut-supporting intelligence of onions, barley, almonds, and pistachios, the wound logic behind figs, the survival design of dates. None of this began in a lab. People ate these foods, watched what happened to strength, illness, recovery, energy, digestion, childbirth, infection, and longevity, and then built agriculture, trade, ritual, and daily life around what they learned. Modern science did not invent the wisdom. It measured it. So here is the challenge: pick 2 foods from this list, just 2, and commit to using the highest quality version you can find for the next 30 days. Not as pills, not as powders, as food. And then do what the ancient world did. Pay attention. If this video opened something up for you, I want to hear it. Which food surprised you most? Was it the figs used like a wound treatment? The onions that helped support the microbiome before anyone knew the raw honey that became hospital-grade wound medicine? Or the olive oil that scripture treated like a substance too important to separate from life itself? Drop it in the comments. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the notification bell. We post every week, and the next video goes even deeper. You do not want to miss it.